Welcome back, everyone. Get ready, because today we're diving deep into Asia between 1700 and 1900.
Ooh, yeah.
We're talking about how Asian nations handled the surge of Western influence.
Right.
Our source material is excerpts from an academic text focused on this era.
Okay.
And we're going to try to figure out how these different countries, how they handled modernization, what problems they ran into, and how those events still have an impact today.
It is a fascinating period. You see such a variety, so many different responses to Western influence.
Yeah.
And each nation had its own history, its own culture.
Right.
And those played a huge role in how they adapted or resisted this wave of change.
Okay, so let's start with the rise of Western influence. I'm picturing European powers.
Yeah.
Armed with better technology.
Right.
Especially weapons. They're setting their sights on the East. Their goals, establishing trade routes, expanding their empires, the usual.
Right. And initially, a lot of Asian nations, well, they weren't all that keen on this interaction. They preferred to keep their interactions with Europeans limited.
Yeah.
But Western powers, they were persistent. They began leveraging their advances to, force open markets and territories.
Things are getting interesting.
Yeah.
And this is where China enters the picture, right? In the 18th century, the Qing Dynasty, they were a dominant force.
Oh, yeah.
They confined European trade to just one port, Guangzhou,
Right.
and insisted on payment in silver bullion. Basically, they were calling the shots.
It was a system that let them control the terms of trade.
Yeah.
But then the British East India Company brought in a new element, opium.
Okay.
This highly addictive drug grown in their Indian colonies, well, it flooded China.
Yeah.
And shifted the balance of trade.
Wow.
Silver started flowing out of China instead of into it.
Yeah.
And, well, you can imagine the social consequences were devastating.
Widespread addiction, unrest, huge economic drain. What did the Chinese government do to counter this?
They appointed an official, Lin Zexu. This guy, he took his task incredibly seriously.
Okay.
He launched a campaign to confiscate and destroy opium shipments.
Oh,
I mean, think about this. He oversaw the destruction of 20,000 chests of opium.
that's a powerful statement. But the British, they obviously weren't happy.
Not at all. They saw this as an attack on their trade and pride, and it led to the First Opium War,
The Opium War.
a clash of empires.
Yeah.
And it really exposed a huge technological gap between the British and the Chinese forces.
Right.
The British, they had advanced weaponry, steam-powered warships. They really dominated.
Sounds like this war forced the Chinese to confront a harsh reality.
It did. China was forced to sign the Treaty of Nanjing,
Okay.
the first in a series of unequal treaties
Unequal treaties.
that eroded their sovereignty.
Yeah.
They had to cede Hong Kong,
Wow.
open additional ports for trade,
Oh, wow.
and grant what was called extraterritoriality to British citizens.
Extra what?
Extraterritoriality, which meant, British citizens were exempt from Chinese law.
So basically they were playing by someone else's rules now.
Exactly. And all this, these opium wars, they contributed to growing instability within China itself.
Okay.
The population was surging, poverty was rampant,
Yeah.
and it all culminated in the Taiping Rebellion.
The Taiping Rebellion.
This wasn't just about overthrowing the Qing dynasty.
No.
It was about transforming Chinese society, from the ground up.
And the leader of this movement,
Hong Xiuquan,
Hong Xiuquan.
a complex figure who blended elements of Christianity
Interesting.
with his own vision for a heavenly kingdom of peace.
Heavenly Kingdom of Peace.
Yeah. His movement attracted millions.
Wow.
Came incredibly close to capturing Beijing
Oh, wow.
before ultimately being crushed.
That's a dramatic near miss. And how did this rebellion shape China's approach to modernization?
Well, it forced the Qing dynasty to, admit their weaknesses.
Right.
To acknowledge they needed to change. They initiated what was called the self-strengthening movement.
The self-strengthening movement.
An attempt to blend Western technology with traditional Chinese values.
Sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It was. They wanted to modernize, but they were so afraid of losing their cultural identity.
Right.
And this hesitation, to really embrace change, it hindered their progress.
So even with those efforts, China continued to face internal and external challenges, ultimately leading to the collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1912.
That's right. Now, let's look at Japan. a stark contrast to China's struggle.
Okay.
They also started out under strict rule, resistant to outside influence.
Right.
But their response to Western pressure led them down a completely different path.
So we've seen China grappling with modernization. But now we turn to Japan, a nation that took a very different approach. You mentioned they were also under strict rule.
Yes. Japan was under the Tokugawa shogunate, and like China, they first tried to keep Western influence at bay. But by the 19th century, there were all these internal pressures, like struggling agricultural sectors, social unrest, and then external forces, Western powers, pushing to open up Japanese markets.
It's like they're getting squeezed from both sides.
What was the, turning point for Japan?
I'd say it was the arrival of Commodore Matthew Perry and his, what are they called? His black ships in 1853.
Black ships?
Yeah. Imagine, you're in Japan at this time, living in relative isolation, and suddenly these massive steam-powered warships just appear in your harbor.
Whoa.
Perry basically forced Japan to sign unequal treaties, kind of similar to the ones China had signed.
Oh, okay.
It was a real wake-up call for Japan.
Okay, so Perry and his black ships really shook things up. But how did the Japanese react to these treaties? I mean, did they just, accept these terms?
No, not at all. The forced opening of Japan, it ignited a pretty fierce backlash.
Okay.
Especially among those who wanted to restore the emperor to power.
Right.
They saw this as a chance to, overthrow the shogunate. And this leads to the Meiji Restoration, right? This is a complete transformation for Japan.
Exactly. In 1868, Emperor Meiji took the throne.
Okay.
And Japan embarked on this rapid modernization program. The Meiji leaders, they understood the threat posed by the West, and they realized they needed to adapt quickly.
Yeah.
So they abolished feudalism, created a Western-style constitutional government, built a modern military, just poured resources into education and industrialization.
It's mind-blowing how quickly they shifted gears. Were there any bumps along the way? Such drastic changes, it seems like there would have to be some tension.
Oh, absolutely. There was internal resistance.
Yeah.
Some people clung to traditional values while others pushed for full Westernization.
Right.
But the Meiji government was determined.
Yeah.
They used, a mix of persuasion and force to, push their agenda. They prioritized industries that would strengthen the nation.
Their approach to industrialization seems completely different from China's. It sounds like Japan was making more fundamental changes.
That's a key insight.
Yeah.
China tried to add Western technology onto their existing system.
Oh, right.
Japan, though, they restructured their entire society.
Wow.
The government, they played a central role guiding development.
Yeah.
It was a top-down approach that proved incredibly effective.
And by the 20th century, Japan had become, an industrial powerhouse, capable of competing with the West.
Right.
That's impressive. But didn't this newfound strength also fuel their imperial ambitions?
Unfortunately, yes. Japan began to see itself as the dominant power in Asia.
Oh, no.
And they set their sights on expansion. Their victory against China in the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894 really showed their growing military might.
So in a way, their successful modernization actually set the stage for future conflicts.
Yeah, a classic case of be careful what you wish for. But for now, let's shift our focus to Korea.
Okay.
They were caught between these rising powers.
Korea always seems to get stuck between a rock and a hard place, geographically speaking. I'm curious to see how they navigated this period. They were under China's influence for a long time, but with China weakened, Korea was vulnerable.
You're right. They were in a very precarious position, facing pressure from both Japan and Western powers.
We left off with Korea in a very vulnerable position. Can you, paint a picture of what was happening within Korea during this time?
Well, Korea under the Joseon Dynasty had a long history of isolationism.
Right.
However, just like their neighbors, they couldn't ignore these, winds of change.
Yep.
Back in the 1700s, they actually had a period of reform. Kings like Yeonjeo and Jeonjeo, they tried to streamline the government, tried to modernize the military, boost education. There was even this movement called SILAC. Yeah, they advocated for teaching Western science. You even start to see growing Christian influence.
So they were aware of what was happening elsewhere and trying to keep up.
Yeah, but it was a constant struggle.
Right.
I mean, they faced internal divisions and, of course, those external threats we were talking about.
Right.
And then it's like a shockwave. News of the First Opium War reached Korea.
I imagine that must have been a big wake-up call for them.
Absolutely. It highlighted how vulnerable they were to, the West's growing power.
Mm-hmm.
There was a sense of unease, and this led to the rise of new religious movements.
Okay.
One in particular was Dongkak.
Dongkak.
It was this fascinating blend of Korean spirituality, Confucianism, Buddhism, even some Christian elements.
That's a real mix of influences.
Mm-hmm.
How did the ruling class react to this new religious movement?
They saw it as a threat.
A threat.
In 1864, they executed the founder of Dongkak, Cho Jae-yu.
Oh, wow.
But, instead of quelling the movement, this only fueled discontent.
So you have internal unrest, external pressure, and now a religious crackdown. What happened next?
Well, Prince Gojong, he later became Emperor Gojong, took the throne. Initially, he and his wife, Empress Myeongsong, tried to resist Western influence.
Right.
But they were eventually forced to sign treaties opening Korea to trade. It's like history repeating itself.
Yeah. Given what we've learned about Japan's ambitions, I can't imagine this turned out well for Korea.
You're right. In 1894, the Donghak Rebellion erupted.
Okay.
Driven by opposition to Western influence and government corruption.
Right.
Japan saw this as their chance to intervene, and
Wow.
this led to the First Sino-Japanese War.
And as we know, Japan emerged victorious, which, further strengthened their grip on Korea.
Exactly. Empress Myeongsong, she saw the danger
Yeah.
and tried to counter Japan's influence by building ties with Russia.
Okay.
But sadly, this was a fatal mistake.
Oh, no.
In 1895, Japanese agents assassinated the empress.
That's a chilling turn of events.
It was a brutal act that showed just how far Japan was willing to go to assert their dominance over Korea.
Wow.
King Gojong declared the Korean Empire, hoping to salvage their independence.
Right. But it was too late. In 1910, Japan formally annexed Korea, wiping it off the map as an independent nation for decades to come.
It's a tragic end to Korea's story during this period. We've seen China struggle, Japan rise to power, and Korea fall victim to its neighbors' ambitions. But we can't forget about the Mughal Empire in India. What was happening there during this era?
Well, by the 18th century, the Mughals were already in decline.
Okay.
They were dealing with internal rebellions, a strained treasury from, years of warfare, and challenges from powerful groups like the Sikhs and the Maratha Confederacy.
Right.
Their vast empire was becoming increasingly difficult to manage.
Yeah.
Which made them vulnerable to both internal uprisings and outside forces.
And I'm guessing the British were ready to capitalize on that vulnerability.
Absolutely. They had been steadily increasing their influence through the East India Company.
Right.
And the decline of the Moguls, this provided the perfect opportunity to, seize control. A pivotal moment came in 1757 with the Battle of Plassey.
The British, led by Robert Clive, defeated a key Mughal ally, and this marked a turning point in their dominance. From there, the British just steadily expanded their control, ultimately dissolving the Mughal Empire completely in 1857.
Wow.
This gave rise to the British Raj.
It's incredible how one battle can have such a profound impact, shaping the destiny of, an entire subcontinent.
It really does highlight how dramatically power can shift, especially when one side has superior military technology and strategic cunning. The British, they excelled at both.
Right.
And, it's worth noting that this wasn't just about military power. They acquired the legendary Koh-i-Noor diamond during this period.
The Koh-i-Noor.
Which eventually ended up with Queen Victoria.
The Koh-i-Noor diamond. It's not just, a beautiful gem. It symbolizes such a complex and controversial history.
Exactly. It embodies the complexities of colonialism, the legacy of British rule in India. Even today, several countries claim ownership of the diamond, seeing its return as a matter of national pride and historical justice.
Wow, this deep dive has been quite a journey. We've witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the struggle for modernization, the tragic consequences of unchecked ambition.
Mm-hmm.
What are the key takeaways you hope I remember from this exploration?
I think one of the most important takeaways is how technology can completely change the global balance of power.
Right.
The West's superior weaponry, industrial capacity, even communication systems.
Yeah.
These things allowed them to exert their influence across continents, often at the expense of those who lacked those advancements.
Right.
It just reinforces that adapting to change is, it's crucial for survival.
And we saw that play out in such different ways. China initially resisted change, struggled. Japan, on the other hand, embraced modernization and became a power player.
Yeah.
But then their success ultimately fueled those imperial ambitions we talked about.
And then, of course, you have Korea stuck in the middle, trying to modernize, trying to maintain their sovereignty,
Right.
but ultimately falling victim to larger geopolitical forces. It's a reminder that even the best efforts at reform can be overtaken by those larger forces at play.
This period also raises questions about, modernization itself. Is it simply about adopting Western ways? Or can a nation modernize while, holding on to its own values and identity?
That's a really complex question. A lot of nations struggled with it then, and they continue to wrestle with it today.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer. And, each nation's journey is unique. Their history, culture, internal dynamics, they all play a role.
It makes you realize how interconnected the world truly is. What happens in one corner of the globe can ripple outward and create change elsewhere. This period of Western expansion, it really set the stage for the geopolitical landscape we see today.
And it's crucial to remember that history isn't just a collection of stories from the past.
Right.
It's a living force that shapes our present and our future.
So as I reflect on this deep dive, what's the so what? How can I apply these historical lessons to the world today?
I think one important lesson is to recognize the value of different perspectives.
Okay.
We explored the same events from multiple angles: a Chinese official, a Japanese reformer, a Korean ruler.
Yeah.
And each had their own unique viewpoint. It just emphasizes the importance of challenging your own assumptions, seeking out multiple perspectives before forming your own conclusions.
Yep. It's a good reminder to be open-minded. Consider different viewpoints.
And equally important is critical thinking.
Okay.
We are bombarded with information today.
Right.
You have to be able to sift through it all, identify biases, determine what's fact and what's fiction.
Yeah.
Don't just passively absorb information.
Right.
Actively engage with it, question it, and form your own conclusion.
Be an active participant, not just a passive consumer of information.
Precisely. And finally, remember that history isn't predetermined.
Okay.
Choices made by individuals and nations, no matter how small they may seem at the time, can have a ripple effect and shape the future.
It's empowering to know that we all have a role to play in shaping our own destinies.
It is indeed. As we conclude, I'd like to leave you with a question to ponder.
Okay.
If these Asian nations grappled with modernization back then, what challenges do they face in today's world?
Mm-hmm.
How might the lessons learned from their past inform their present and future?
That's a great question to reflect on. It seems our deep dive into history has opened up even more avenues for exploration. Thanks for guiding me through this fascinating period.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, the journey through history is never truly over. Keep learning, keep questioning, and stay curious.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.